So look, if you are like so many other real estate agents that struggle day in and day out with call reluctance to make your outbound prospecting phone calls with any type of consistency, today I'm going to share a whole new strategy on how to approach your call reluctance so that this phone no longer weighs 1,000 pounds and it might just give you a different perspective. So here's the reality. If you're making a decision not to make your sales calls, it's simply a byproduct of your emotions, not your logic. More on that in just a second, which to be fair makes sense, right? Humans make decisions how? Based on emotion, and then we justify those decisions and we rationalize those decisions later with logic. So today I'm going to share a strategy, a tactic rather, that you can go through every single time you don't feel like making your sales call. So there's 7 questions that you're going to go through. So I might grab something to write with and so that you can take notes. And so write down these 7 questions. And when I go through these 7 questions with you and the potential answers to those questions, I think the way in which you're going to approach the feeling of not making your sales calls completely differently. So let's jump right into it. So question number 1 is, what is the worst thing that can happen if I make this call? So here's an interesting way to look at answering that question. Before we make a phone call, before we pick up the call to call anybody, or pick up the phone rather to call anybody, what is it that we have right now before we make the call? Do we have a lead? Do we have an appointment? Do we have an opportunity? Well, clearly the answer to that is no. So the worst thing that can happen potentially is you pick up the phone, you call a prospect, and you already get what you already have, which is nothing. So the worst thing that can occur from making the phone call, the absolutely worst, is you don't get what you already don't have. So when I thought about that, when I think about that, it becomes clear that truly I have nothing to lose by making the phone call because I already don't have the opportunities. So worst case is I make the call, I leave the call, and I don't have what I already don't have. So question number 2 is, what is the best thing that could happen? Well, certainly by calling the prospect, the best thing that can occur is that I do get something that I don't have, which is a potential seller lead, or better yet, a listing appointment. Question number 3, how will I feel if I don't make the calls? Well, here's the reality. Whether you make the call or don't make the calls, it will result in you feeling rather badly. And what I mean by that is this. If you don't make the calls, what I hear all the time from agents that I coach is when I don't prospect, I carry around this guilt all day for not following through on my commitments. Okay, great. So that's a feeling that we don't love. But if I make the calls, Brandon, well, I feel very uncomfortable when I'm making the calls. So let's look at this logically. If by both of those outcomes, by making the call and not making the calls, makes you feel badly, the question then we have to ask ourselves is, which of those 2 evils is less painful? And so if we look at that, for most of us, it makes a lot more sense that if by making the call or not making the call both bring us pain, wouldn't it just make sense that at least we benefit from the pain? So as an example, we know that if we don't make the call, we don't get an opportunity. The likelihood of that is 100% certainty. However, if we make the call, yes, it's still painful. The likelihood of us getting something positive from the call and that call bringing us closer, then that would be the pain that would make more sense for us to deal with. So question number 4, if I make the calls, regardless of the outcome, how will I feel? So here is where things get really interesting. So when you make prospecting phone calls, right? And you're making your calls, dial after dial after dial after dial. Let's just pretend, and let's, because this is kind of where you would probably get to in your head anyway, is, well, Brandon, I'm making the calls and I'm still not getting anything, which then makes things worse. Okay, cool. Let's just play that out. If that happens to you and you don't generate a lead and you don't generate an appointment from a prospecting session, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, isn't it fair that you at least start to build in some self-confidence. Why do I say that? Well, the fastest way and the best way to build self-confidence is to follow through on the commitments you've made to yourself. We just talked about what happens or how it makes you feel when you don't make the calls and you feeling guilty all day or all week because it's like, I know I should be prospecting and I'm not. Okay, that's a feel of guilt. Well, if you make the calls and you don't get a lead and you don't generate an appointment, at least you can get a positive feeling for following through on the commitments. You see what I'm getting at? If you don't, you're going to feel a certain way. You might as well feel a certain way through the actions in which you're going to take, and I'm going to unpack that thought here in just a second. Question number 5. What is the likelihood that I am going to get what I want if I don't make the calls? Well, it's very simple, 0%. If you don't talk to any new prospects, how likely is it that you generate a lead, you generate an appointment, you get any confidence, you grow your skills? How likely is any of those things to happen? It's 0% chance. Well, on the flip side of things, what is the likelihood of you getting something that you want if you do make the calls? Well, we could just look at the average conversion ratios, regardless of how long you've been in real estate sales. It doesn't matter. On average, 10% of the time, you're going to come away with a great seller lead to go into the database, or better yet, a listing appointment. So the only way we can get that 10% average is if you do what? If you make the calls consistently. So if we're playing a game of what is more likely or less likely to happen, there is no absolutes in this world. It is more likely that by making the call, it will, in fact, result in you getting closer to getting what it is that you want. Question number 6, even if I don't get the lead, I don't get the appointment, are there any benefits to me making these damn calls? Well, the answer to that is yes, absolutely 100%. We just talked about a few, but the self-confidence that you get out of following through with the commitments that you've made to yourself, that you've made to your family by making the calls, by showing up and doing the actions will help to bring more self-confidence. That's number 1. Number 2, what about your skill set? Right? If you want to suck less at making outbound sales calls, you have to make more sales calls. If you want to increase anything or increase the skills of anything rather, we all know we just have to do more of that thing. So even if you don't get a lead or an appointment on that prospecting session, you still build more confidence. You still strengthen your mindset. And oh, by the way, your skills are getting better every single phone call. What I tell my coaching clients is, listen, it's going to take you 1,000 conversations for you to start to build in some conviction in what you're doing to actually get results. So you want to get those 1,000 conversations done as fast as possible. So there are great benefits to making the phone calls, even when you don't get the result technically that you're looking for. Okay, so here's the mindset hack that I promised earlier in the video. This is gonna help you guys so much get past that overwhelming sensation or feeling of that call reluctance that you feel all too often. On the days you don't feel like making your outbound prospecting phone calls, don't let how you feel dictate the actions you take, but rather the actions you take dictate how it is that you feel. Think about that for a second. So James Clear talks about this in great detail in his book, Atomic Habits. And what he talks about is just doing one. And in this case, I would offer that same advice to you. Just make one outbound call and then determine how you feel. And in many, many, many cases, it's just the one outbound phone call is all we need to get into massive action. Because as soon as we can pick up that phone and make the first call, now we've conquered the feelings that before our old self dictated our behaviors. So what I'm suggesting now is instead of you operating your entire life based on how you feel, let the actions that you take dictate how you feel. So when you don't feel like making the call, make one phone call. And at that point in time, you then decide how you feel. Do I feel like making more phone calls. And in many cases, that is exactly how you're going to feel. It's like, I'm here anyways. I've already started. I might as well keep going, which is the hack. Or if after you make your one phone call, you're like, you know what? I just don't feel it today. Allow yourself off the hook. And here's the key thing. When you can do that, regardless if you keep going or you decide I'm not making the calls, at least your feelings and how you go about managing your emotions is simply now a byproduct of the actions you've taken versus the old self that really operates and behaves based on how we feel. So we're going to invert the two, and no longer are we going to allow our the way in which we feel rather dictate what it is that we do, but rather what we do will dictate how we feel. So I am really hoping that this brings you a whole new sense of clarity on how to approach your call reluctance. Certainly, it's what I do for a living with all of the agents that I coach. So let me know if you're open to having a coaching relationship. I'll put a link in the comments right underneath this video. Feel free to click the link if you are open to that or not. Either way, I hope that today's video brought you a whole new mindset around, okay, man, I just keep dealing with this call reluctance over and over again, Brandon. How can I become more consistent? I hope today's video has done just that. So appreciate your time and your attention like always, and we'll see you guys in another video very soon.